All right. Thank you, Ethan, for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Uh, it's I'm looking forward to talking to you about the counseling and mental health uh, stuff and some parenting things too.
Sure.
But before we dive in, can you introduce yourself to listeners?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, people are going to hear about this more, but I'm trying to introduce myself. Often, uh, in our culture, we introduce ourselves by our career,
Mm.
and one of the things I'm learning in my current journey is that my life is more about my career, more than my career. Um, So I'll just start by telling you a little bit about myself, and eventually we'll get to what I do. But I'll start by telling you a little bit about me. Um, the more I'm learning about myself, the more I'm learning that I'm a very curious person. Um, I am just fascinated with this world and life, and am always trying to learn new things. My roommate has called me a Renaissance man because it always seems like I'm learning something new, and it's because I am. I love to, like, if I find something that seems interesting, I'm gonna pursue that and learn more about it. Um, just this last weekend, I took a kite surfing lesson because that sounded interesting to me.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm just a very curious person. It's always growing up, I was always taught to be a lifelong learner, and curiosity was a value that I've just picked up and um, continue to do. So that's like, as I learn more about myself, I'm learning that one of the core things about me is that I'm a very curious person. Career wise, I am currently, I'm defining myself as a counselor in transition. Um, so I am currently practicing as a therapist. I work with individuals, couples, and families, but mostly individuals and families, and I do some parenting work as well. Um, and I'm transitioning out of that currently, and so that's kind of been its own process. But that's where I'm at. That's what I'm doing for a living right now. I don't know what's next, but I am in the process of transitioning out of that. um, Professionally, as a counselor, I have a couple areas of interest, um, one of which is I provide workshops to parents and families around excessive technology use. And I help parents navigate this world of technology that they find their kids in, and how to set boundaries around that. And I call it collaborative dialogue, how to have collaborative dialogue that builds relationships rather than becomes a barrier.
Oh, that that's such a huge topic, such a huge issue.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, the even before we spent the last year and a half doing online school uh, with all ages, not just college students and graduate students, but
Yeah.
5-year-olds. Um, but yeah, even more so, just uh, uh, parent parenting with uh, screens, screen time, and technology.
Hmm.
That's such a huge topic. Um, Before I pick your brain about what you've learned and learn more about uh, how to have that collaborative dialogue
Yeah.
with your kids, can you share a little bit more, Ethan, about uh, how you came to that decision about making a transition?
Yeah. So I think that like many counselors, the decision to become a therapist was very much rooted in my story, um, and my life experience. I've just always been good with people. Um, I've been a very empathetic person for a very long time, and that's rooted in my own childhood experiences. And combine that with the messaging that I got growing up around pursuing a higher education, going to college. So initially, I got my undergraduate degree in Christian ministry because that's what I thought was going to be my direction. But as I was graduating, kind of inconveniently, I realized that ministry wasn't something I wanted to do for a profession. Um, and so I graduated with this bachelor's in Christian ministry and had just decided that I didn't want to be a minister professionally. Um, so it was kind of like, what's next? And so I spent a year or so working as a paraeducator in schools. Also did some nonprofit work in between then. And I just started connecting with the kids and the families that I was working with at the school. But I always ran into a barrier being a paraeducator at a school. Like I couldn't reach the home. I felt like there was something missing. I couldn't reach the home because they would always come back to school the next day, these kids I was working with, and nothing, it seemed like the things that I was working with them on hadn't changed. And so naturally, the next direction, again, with this emphasis on higher education and pursuing a professional career, I looked around and found Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. I found their marriage, couple, and family therapy program, and I was really intrigued by that, and didn't apply anywhere else. I just applied for Lewis and Clark, and they accepted me. So I took that as a sign that that was the right fit. I dropped all the other applications I was working on and just decided to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got my master's degree there and started practicing as a therapist, working with children, families, and also adult individuals. But even throughout my training, back to your original question, even throughout my training in school, when we started doing the practical stuff, like I said, I'm a naturally curious person, so the education part of it was always fun. I'm a very good
All the
student.
reading and all
Reading and learning new information, yeah, and engaging in dialogue with other people around psychology and proper treatment, all these things. I was just absorbing it and enjoying it. When it came to the actual practice of it, something just didn't feel right. I remember the first time in school when we were practicing the skills portion, like actually practicing with our peers in front of us and the professors watching, practicing the work we'd been working on. I just froze. And like I was so overwhelmed with anxiety.
Mm.
And that whole time of practicing in that practicing class, I was just an anxious mess. And so my professors, I finally got the courage to tell them that, and said, "Oh, you're just new. You know, this is normal part of the process and growth as a therapist. Go see your own therapist." So I started doing that, working on some things to hopefully reduce that anxiety. But it never really went away. I did all kinds of work with multiple therapists, and that anxiety never really went away. But I kept listening to what people were telling me, which is, you're a new therapist. Just keep talking about it with your own therapist, talk to your supervisors, and do what you can to get through this initial period. You'll start to feel more comfortable. And when it came to like being in sessions with people, I was generally okay. But the before and after, just totally overwhelmed. with constant anxiety.
Going into the day or into
Yeah.
the week with your schedule, your
Mm-hmm.
caseload.
Mm-hmm. And then after sessions, before sessions, just so much tension and anxiety.
Mm.
And um, after I graduated, I started a private practice and was working on my technology use stuff, that content. And even though I was only seeing clients a couple days a week, I was still feeling that anxiety.
Mm.
But I pushed through. I started getting more education because I love education. I learned about trauma and trauma treatment and loved that. Responded well to that. Um, and and then I took my work full time. I left my private practice because COVID had hit, and started working for another organization full time. And at that point, the anxiety amplified. And because
I was gonna guess that maybe some of the stress or anxiety was private practice, and that maybe
no,
being a part of an organization might help with
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Got worse.
yeah, exactly. And I was thinking that too. That's why, in addition to COVID, I was also like, I want to try a different setting, see if private practice just wasn't the right fit for me starting out.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the things I've realized as I've been processing what's been going on is every setting, whether it's practicing in a practice environment at school, to my clinical internships, to private practice, to now an agency, something just hasn't felt right.
Mm.
And it's led to very high amounts of anxiety. And add on to that a global pandemic and the stress of that. It got to the point where my anxiety was so high that I was starting to have panic attacks. I'd never had panic attacks before. Um, waking up in the middle of the night, just having a hard time breathing and feeling really overwhelmed. And I was seeing a new therapist at the time, and finally admitted to myself. I said, you know, whether I take a break temporarily or permanently, I have to.
From this
Because
work.
yeah, from the work of therapy. And that was a really hard choice. It took me a long time because, again, everyone was telling me you're a new therapist and I'm a people pleaser. So everyone was telling me you're so great at this. You have so many natural skills for this. And I agree, I do.
Keep going. They were
Yeah, just
telling you.
keep going. Yeah, everyone's telling me to keep going, keep going. But it got to the point where it got to the point where people saying that felt really insincere to me. It was, I knew they were coming with good motives because I'm good at what I do and I have the skills for it. But it didn't match up with what I was experiencing. And I was like, whenever someone would say that to me internally, I would say to myself, how long do I have to go through this? And then there was another existential question on top of that, like, because the narrative that I'd been given was I go to school, I get my degree, I go to a good school, which I did, and yeah, because you went to a good school, you get a good job, and I did, and you're working at a good company, and then you're going to feel great. And I was miserable. And so the other existential question was, is this it? Is this what, like, I thought this was supposed to be good. I've done everything that I was told to do growing up. I was a really incredible student. I am good at my work. No one says anything negative about what I do. In terms of supervision, of course, I've made some clinical errors. We all do, but But I do my work well, and
People were helped. Your clients were helped.
yeah, people are being helped. I'm doing good work. People are healing, but I don't feel good. And I love seeing that transformation, but the day to day of doing the work of therapy doesn't sit with me. It's like something about that work didn't fit. Um,
How
and
how I can just hear the stress of how just how hard you had to work to just push through that.
yeah,
Did the anxiety and the stress, did that affect your mood too? Did it discourage you?
yeah, yeah. So I think um, so it got pretty traumatic. Um, the stress got really high and it was impacting my mood. So I consulted with for the first time in my life, I consulted with a doctor and was like, well, maybe some medication can help. And again, I was still at that point, I was still in the mode of like, I just got to get through this. Um, I consulted with a doctor and took some medication, which in general is really helpful for people. But for me, it wasn't. And it actually made my anxiety worse. And because my stress levels were already so high, I entered into something I'd never experienced before. I started derealizing. Um,
Can you explain that for listeners who might not be
yeah.
familiar
So
with that?
it took me a while to understand what I was going through. It took a lot of independent research because no one ever talked about it. Even in my trauma education, I learned about dissociation, but never derealization. And so when we think of like traumatic responses, a lot of us think about dissociation, which is someone leaving their body, that withdrawal from yourself. But derealization is kind of the opposite. It's where your mind kind of withdraws from the world, and the world starts to feel really unreal and like a dream, or like you're in this really bad dream. Or for me, it was like everyone around me is just acting. None of this is real.
It
And
reminds me. For some reason, I was wearing my Avenger T-shirt today because we have enjoyment of comic books in
yeah,
common. So I
yes,
wanted to
both
have
of us
fun with
do.
you today.
Yeah,
But as you're describing that, it reminds me of the WandaVision TV show.
yes, yeah. Oh my goodness. So I'm happy you bring that up because that was one of the things that helped me realize I was grieving that show. Um, because I was dealing with this derealization. And in the show WandaVision, I'm not going to provide any spoilers, but like you find out that there's some kind of grief process happening. And that's what was leading to everything that's going on. And I started crying, weeping when I was watching that show because I realized I'm grieving. This is like the derealization was a response to the incredible stress of like add on to a global pandemic and all the stress of that, losing a lot of my community, but also like this was my life's narrative to get this job, to be in this place, and that it would be satisfying. And it wasn't.
A lot of it was handed to you too. That was just
Yeah.
kind of what you were told.
Yeah. This is what I was told. And that wasn't the case. And I knew that it wasn't the case. Um, I knew that it wasn't a good fit for me personally at this time in my life. Um, and and so that show WandaVision actually made me realize I'm grieving. And the derealization is trying to like keep me safe and hold on, um, because nothing felt real. My This was the narrative. It didn't fit. Like
But
the
you weren't. It sounds like isn't like you were realizing like you didn't fit into the narrative that you were handed.
Yeah, yeah. And that was the first time I'd ever felt that, because I've been such a good student, and I've been, some people have called me an information sponge. So whatever someone, like what people were telling me, the narratives of what I was supposed to do, what I'm good at, that's what I followed. And it got me to a place of therapy and providing therapy, and people are right, I do really good work, uh, but it doesn't fit for me as a career. So um, that's where I found myself. And then,
And you found yourself there this last year.
yeah, yeah, that was around February or March, when we in Portland experienced that winter freeze. That's when I started admitting for myself. That's when I started derealizing and admitting, okay, this is not a good fit. My mental health is clearly not in a good spot. I've got to figure out how I can transition.
Mm. So this kind of came to the surface or worsened with medication.
Yeah.
Did you uh, get like the dosage or change medication? How did you work through that?
Yeah. So I obviously right away talked to my doctor about what was going on. I think that's the first thing anybody should do. And they took me off, because I was already on a low dose. So they took me off. We tapered off a bit, but I voluntarily took myself off after only like 5 days of tapering, which is not enough time. But I was derealizing. I was like, I just got to stop this.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and and so no, I didn't try anything new. I think I was so traumatized by that I didn't want to try it.
Mm.
And again, I think like it's hard sharing the story because like anyone who's listening, medications are generally helpful. If that's the route you choose to go, they're generally helpful. I'm a fringe case, and for some people it takes experimentation to find the right thing. But my reaction is like a small thing. As I've talked to my doctor about this experience, what we think probably happened is since I was already under such a high level of stress, for some people, certain medications can, if you respond negatively, it can elevate your anxiety.
Mm.
But because I was already at a high level of anxiety, it took me out of what we in the trauma field call the window of tolerance. And so it took me out of that tolerance. I've had anxiety a lot of my life. And so my tolerance was already pretty high, but this pushed me out of it for the first
Mm.
time.
Mm.
And
And
it
you and
just,
you didn't have uh much to go or anywhere to go. Uh
right.
yeah, but there.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And so like that was my body's reaction. Let's get out of here. This isn't real. It's a protective thing.
Mm.
So that's the point where
How
I
you,
decided to transition.
you told your doctor,
Yeah.
um your friends or family?
Yeah. I told my family.
What was this like for them? Like,
Um, I mean, it was just like honestly going home was like the most grounding thing. I had to find something that when your brain is telling you that everything around you isn't real, I had to go to something that I knew was real. And that was my family. So I spent a lot of time with family, um, told them how I was feeling because talking about it out loud actually helped me a little bit. Um, Sometimes I would joke about the derealization because it helped me make light of the situation and feel a little bit better about it.
Mm.
Um, and then I would just tell them what's going on. Often I would be crying as I tell them about this because I would come to them being overwhelmed.
Mm.
And it took a lot of comfort from them. They just had to be there. My mom would sit next to me and wrap her arm around me and just say, "You're going to be okay."
Mm.
You know, makes me emotional just thinking about it. I wish everyone had access to great parents, um, because like that saved me.
Yeah. Yeah. I know your mom. So, uh,
Yeah,
and boy, that must have been just so hard. But I'm glad, um, she knew what to do
yeah,
as a
yeah.
mom. Yeah.
She did know what to do. Because she didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arm around me, um,
Mm.
and was rubbing my back. Um, so that was really helpful.
Mm.
Um, Something else was coming to mind, but that left, so probably not important.
Mm. So it you were this flared up. You tried it for 5 days, but you just couldn't keep going. Um, Tapered off, and then
Well, I was
so
actually on that medication for a month. It
oh,
was
I
the
see.
tape.
The
It
the
was the
5.
tapering. Yeah, it was the tapering off that I only did for 5 days,
Man.
which always consult with your doctor and follow your doctor's recommendation because turns out, as I learned, cutting off a medication, a mental health medicine, cold turkey, some of it, it's no problem. But depending on the medicine, you can actually have some more negative symptoms.
Wow.
Um, and I did. So
Yeah.
I had to weather that on top of everything else.
Okay. So I'm I'm guessing you're not seeing clients at that point.
Um, I took a couple days off when it was really bad,
Okay.
but I was still seeing clients, doing as the work that I could. Probably not at my best, but I was still making change happen. Like I said, I'm pretty good at what I do, um, but uh, but yeah, it was hard,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I was getting ongoing consultations. So like
Okay.
my supervisors, they knew what was going on. I was informing them of everything I was going through, what I was doing. So I was constantly consulting to make sure that I was still providing good services when I could.
Yeah. Uh, just as you describe that, Ethan, it just reminds me that folks that have anxiety or struggle with anxiety, it's like people who have like a high physical pain tolerance. Like you you learn to keep functioning and keep working and keep going,
Yeah,
and and outside looking in, like you might seem fine, but you just get used to it, just
yeah,
keep going. And
yeah.
man, the you was it that um uh episode or experience with the derealization, was that what it uh was kind of the last straw for deciding that therapy, at least for now, isn't what's best for you, or were there other factors?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was the last straw. I mean, I was already thinking about it. I had been thinking about it for a while, but when it got to the point where I was experiencing such high levels of stress and trauma, that was where the question of how long, like how long is this worth it? Like it was no longer worth it. When it was impacting my view of reality itself, I was like, I can't. So that was
Yeah.
the last straw for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. when we started today, you made the point of how we introduce ourselves,
Yeah.
and like our and I think what you're saying was like our identity is like so tied to our career and our job and what we do. What are
Hmm.
you learning about identity from this?
So the aftermath of all this, when I started to transition, it led from high levels of anxiety to the total opposite. I've always been anxious, but I've never been depressed. For the first time in my life, I started feeling depressed. And I think that was largely because of this question of identity. Like I had inherited this narrative about career, and career and faith were always my identity points. And a lot of those, my faith started shifting in my undergrad program. And so that was different. Still part of a faith community, and I'm really happy to be there. But it's not as identity as it was before. So that wasn't really there. And then when career was gone, I was left with nothing. And that led to a real existential crisis. Um, and I say led, but it shouldn't be past tense because I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like what? Who am I? Like I didn't know how to answer that. Um, I had no. If someone were to ask me that, um, I I I wouldn't have been able to tell them because like it was career. I placed so much emphasis on I'm a therapist. You know, that was what I did. That was my identity.
Mm.
Um, but when that fell off, uh, it was really, really distressing. Um, there's a lot of hopelessness, like, and it was all existentially rooted. Like, what am I doing here? Um, I would look at my, and this is what depression does. I would look at the things I'm normally really curious about, my hobbies, and be like, what's the point?
Mm.
Um, because again, like that whole for all of my life, I've had one narrative, and it was about getting to where I was and having the career that I had, and it didn't pan out the
Yeah.
way that it was supposed to. So
So if the big picture or the big answer um is not uh in place, then like the smaller things like hobbies and things like that, they seem meaningless and
yeah,
pointless.
yeah, exactly. Um, so this whole time I've been getting therapy, my own therapy, and processing through that. There's a part of me that just wants to find the simple fix. Good
Mm.
luck with that. Um,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
slowly I've started to expand my understanding, and that's very much in process. So
Yeah.
that's why I started with I'm learning, I'm really curious. You know, the pursuit of knowledge
That's
is,
still true about you.
yeah,
So you're
that's
still
true.
using that strength
Yeah,
to
that's still
study and
true.
learn.
And
Hmm.
if that changes, okay. I've dealt with changes, I guess, now. Um,
Couple times.
yeah,
Ministry and then therapy. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Um, but right now I'm just learning. I'm a really curious person, and the pursuit of knowledge and information and experiences, that that carries me most days. Some days I still get caught in the existential, like, what does this even mean? Or um, not recognizing uh, like where I'm at right now, because again, my narrative was about being in a certain career and I'm transitioning out of that. So it's not recognizing that. So that's tough some days, but I'm starting to expand my idea of identity. I started to have more faith conversations with people again, integrate that back into my life in ways that it wasn't before. Um, so I'm trying to make some changes.
Mm. That uh, integrating faith and having those conversations with others more. It would you say what you've gone through, at least with your faith and it sounds like it's it's different than your upbringing. Would you say
Yeah,
it's like you went through that like a deconstruction of
I,
your faith and you're
yeah, I did.
reconstructing?
Yeah, I did. And that started in undergraduate program because I intentionally chose a school that was going to make me ask questions. And that tied to me being a curious person. Um, like I didn't want to go to a place that believed what I believed at the time. And I wanted to be challenged and it did challenge me. And so the ideas that I and a lot of this didn't happen. The deconstruction wasn't triggered by thoughts or certain things that people exposed me to. It was, it happened as I interacted with more people. And as I met really good, kind people who, in the faith tradition I was brought up in, wouldn't think we're good, kind people.
Mhm.
And so there was a lot of disconnect there. And um, and so I started asking some questions around what I really believed about God and other people. And so that started to deconstruct. And for me, it started snowballing. Um, but now I am starting to, perhaps by necessity, start to connect more with a higher power and have faith-based conversations with friends of mine that can, because right now when your identity is so fluid and it's changing a lot, to believe in something higher, I think that's why AA is so helpful. uh, Alcoholics Anonymous or um, other 12-step groups, like you're going through a lot of changes, and having some kind of belief in a higher power um, can ground you in that process.
Yeah. This this process here, it sounds like it's a process of like of discovery. W-
Mhm.
would you say what you're going through is also healing? Like you're going through the healing that you need? How do you?
If healing is painful, then yeah, I think like maybe that's something to learn is,
Mm.
and we know from being a therapist, healing sometimes takes going through a lot of pain and addressing pain. And yeah, I think I am healing, but day to day, it doesn't always feel like healing.
Yeah. It. I just want to say, Ethan, it's brave of you to come on and talk with me while you're experiencing pain still.
Yeah,
It's not all clean and like resolved.
it's not.
Um, but I really appreciate you sharing that. Um, you I, I don't even know
Yeah,
if it's accurate to say that you've got the worst is behind you. Like
yeah,
certainly the, the situation with the medication is like really
yeah.
bad.
That's behind me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I. It's interesting. I grew up in a Christian tradition where whenever you would hear testimonies of people,
Hmm.
everything was always in the past. Like you could only provide a testimony if your struggles were over. Well, that's not my reality. I'm still struggling. And so I want to be truthful. Like, it's not, healing takes a lot of time, and it's it's a long process.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so you're still discovering I think you said it left a hole, the ministry. Um, I don't think you're still finding. you- I, I I don't know. Maybe it's not something. Maybe it's not one thing to replace it.
Yeah,
But maybe it's many things. And what we do isn't our identity. But one thing that I've observed as we've been connected on social media is um, in the last year, baking has been
sure.
a positive
Yeah,
for you. Can you share a little bit about that?
yeah. Well, I like to brag that I was into sourdough before COVID, because it seemed like once COVID hit, everybody was trying sourdough.
Yes.
Um, but that was something that started um, uh, prior to COVID, prior to last year. I've been baking for a long time.
Oh, okay.
It was, yeah, no, it's fine. But I did start sharing about it because I was really, a couple things happened with baking. Um, I started to bake just by seeing someone on Instagram back in like January of 2019. An actress I follow was going through this beginner's book and sharing her journey. And I was like, you know what? That sounds interesting. Again, with that curiosity. And I just decided to try it. And I fell in love with it. For someone who's had anxiety a lot of his life, I think the process of baking, particularly bread, is really therapeutic, because a lot of things, like there's a lot of prep work that you have to do. I like that. But when it comes to the actual baking process, you have to let go.
Mm,
Um, and you just have to, like, it's up to nature at that point. It's up to whatever the yeast, these microorganisms, want to do.
mm,
And you can you can create factors, like you can control factors like temperature and time and the ingredients you use, but at the end of the day, something outside of your control is working, and you just have to let it do its thing.
mm. And you've done what you can. You just have to trust that,
Yeah,
or wait and see what
yeah,
happens.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as I was baking, I started discovering the powerful metaphors that were offered by baking. Um, like, sourdough, in the process of making bread, a lot of things die in order to make new things and provide sustenance for lots of other people.
Mm,
Um, and I started reflecting on the various metaphors of that I was learning through baking and sharing that. Um, I was sharing my baking process on social media and Instagram. Um,
I couldn't eat it, but it looked good.
yeah,
It was
yeah,
fun. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so I was doing that, and really, really loving that. I actually was, when I was starting to think about career transition, just pondering it, I started a blog, uh, to share some of my thoughts and the metaphors that I was learning. Uh, but what I learned was I'm not too fond of the writing process. It was another thing, another source of anxiety for me.
Mm,
So I didn't do that anymore. But I'm still really connected to baking, because baking was one of the first, when it comes to identity things that I was building, one of the first things that I just decided to do. Like, I can tie therapy a lot to my story. I can tie how I came to be a therapist to my story. But baking was just something that I saw someone doing and was like that curiosity spark was there. And I was just like, I'm gonna do this. I'm, I'm like out of nowhere. When I first told
Yeah.
my family that I was starting to bake, they were probably a little bit confused. Like,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Ethan baking? What?
Yeah.
But I was like, no, I just want to do this.
Yeah.
And I did it and have been quite good at it.
Yeah. It's you didn't do it because you should. Um
Yeah.
and because that's part of the being a good person or whatever or even
Right.
helping people. You just did it because you wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sharing the bread with others was definitely a plus. I did like providing for people in that way.
Yeah.
But the process of making bread captivated me.
Mm,
And that was something that I feel like I chose, that I was driven to.
yeah. Yeah. Or um this summer, this year, are there other things that you're thinking about choosing? You mentioned the kite surfing,
Yes,
but
yeah,
are
that
there
was
other things that you're curious about? Like,
yeah. Um yeah, yeah, kite surfing was one of them. That was an interesting experience in and of itself. Um but I've been working on I at the beginning I mentioned that one of my areas was around technology use and helping parents walk through that.
mhm,
Even though I'm leaving my practice as a therapist, I plan on continuing to provide workshops in some capacity and information to parents and to be a resource around collaborative dialogue and excessive technology use. So I haven't thought about what that's going to look like yet. It's definitely going to have some website content as well as some workshops over Zoom or in person where I really walk through some of these resources I've gathered and provide some parent training on how to have collaborative dialogue.
nice. So you're you're still going to be working with families and parents.
In some capacity,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I think that was, being the teaching is a different stance than being a therapist. And I enjoyed being a resource and contributing to the change process. It's one of the things I like about therapy, is being part of the change process. And I still do that as when I'm teaching and providing resources. Um, I can still offer something that helps in the transformation process.
Yeah. Yeah. The yeah. Uh it'll be uh interesting to see um not where you land, but like what's the next step for
Yeah,
you? Yeah.
yeah.
Um, as we wind things down for our interview today,
Mm,
are there any last thoughts that you or anything? I'm thinking, you know, folks that have been listening. I'm thinking of folks that might resonate with just having struggled with anxiety for a long
yeah,
time, or anyone who's listening who is asking those existential questions or struggling with that. Um,
yeah,
I know you're still in the middle of it, but what would you say to someone who's in the middle of it with you?
yeah. Well, I think first thing is we get a therapist. If you have access to that, that's been a tremendous help for me. Find a therapist that's a good fit, but give yourself permission. Uh, to This is so cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. Like now that I've gone through such a profound struggle and I'm going through a profound struggle,
Mm.
Give yourself permission to struggle. Um, like I feel better on the days where I connect with what's making me anxious and just allow it to be there. I feel
Mm.
better on those days than on the days where I'm always trying to like make some kind of change happen. And that's
Mm.
that anxious mind is like, what can I do to make this better? What do I need to learn? What's the missing piece? But on the days where I'm able to just sit with myself and allow and maybe incorporate a bit of self-compassion if that doesn't become just another to-do list item for you,
Mm.
but just give yourself permission to struggle, get a therapist, and expand your idea of identity. I think i think our culture is doing a real disservice to people by placing so much emphasis on what we do.
Mm.
We're human beings, not human doings.
Yeah. That uh, as you describe that, I can I can just feel kind of a sense of peace and letting go. Uh,
Yeah,
I like the way you describe uh, not making it like another thing on your to-do list.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because that's what it would become for me.
Mm.
When I learned about self-compassion, it just became another thing to do. When I would do a successful intervention with my own therapist, it became another thing for me to do. I got to do this all the time,
Mm.
and I can't do that. That's not going to take away the struggle.
I'm sorry for how hard things that have been for you at times, Ethan. But I'm glad that that you're learning,
Yeah,
and yeah, I'm really looking forward to um, seeing the healing, and it's been fun to because I've known you for years,
yeah,
to see you grow up and the growth that you've had um, so far. So thank you for coming on and sharing
yeah.
with us your story.
I'm glad I could do this.
I'll see you around.
Yeah, thank you.